If I've learned anything over 25 years of business, it's that finance leaders don't fail because they don't know the numbers. They fail because they're not in the conversation when the decision is made about those numbers. This is why we've created the CFO Review. I'm Paul Lynch, the CEO of Centage, and every week in each episode, I'm going to sit down with CFOs and finance leaders and unpack how they got to that seat, the decisions that shaped them, and how they're turning finance into being a real strategic partner. Great finance isn't about reporting the past. It's about shaping what comes next. So let's get into it. Hey everyone, welcome to this week's CFO Review. I'm delighted to have our guest this week, Peter Pixton, who is a San Antonio resident and current CFO of Robotics Plus, a very high-tech industrial robotics business based here in San Antonio, Texas. Thanks for joining us today, Peter.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
So, Peter, as I was saying earlier, typically what we look to do on the CFO Review, we're looking to answer how mid-management finance professionals like you were once, are successful in jumping that Rubicon between being an operational part of a team and between leading a team at a C level and becoming more strategic and less technical in terms of their finance role. So how we do this, like if we could endear you to give us a bit of a background.
Sure.
What attracted you to finance, early jobs, early decisions you made, key decisions in terms of that evolution as you move from being, a junior member of the team through to the CFO role that you have today. Then we look at where you see the future of finance. And also how you actually jumped the Rubicon. What was the decision that you made that allowed you to get across there? And then we'll finish up with some smaller questions and stuff. So I'll hand it over to you, Peter. Maybe tell us a bit about yourself and your start and where you're coming from and the journey.
Yeah, sounds great. So when I was at university, I was really interested in living things, and I got deep into biology. And I'm a little bit older maybe than some of your listeners, but back then there was new technology that was being commercialized that was really around DNA analysis and RNA analysis and really looking at that. And I had a professor who had a very interesting project that was looking at the evolution of fish through time. Fish are great because they get stranded into ponds and lakes in different places, and you can almost always tie it to a geological event. So we know the stranding happened 10 million years ago when there was an earthquake that put a piece of land in between the two halves of the lake, and now they haven't connected for a while. Well, how have the fish evolved in those different environments? And
I'm really looking forward to seeing where this goes.
So, we would take fish tissue samples and start looking at how are the genes, what are the genes in some of the locations look like. And that was a fantastic project. I spent a lot of time in the lab, really enjoyed it. Ended up with a degree in molecular biology, and I thought I really want to go into infectious diseases or epidemiology, something like that. Got a job at a university lab, and I worked there for about 2 years.
Interesting.
And during that time, I was rubbing shoulders with a lot of really bright people, all of them working on PhDs or already had PhDs, doing postdoctoral work on lots of important areas related to human health. But I did realize one thing. Nobody's getting rich in this business. And it wasn't that I was all about money, but I did kind of think this long term, this could be a tough job. And the reason, I had a cube mate of mine. She was on her third postdoctoral fellowship. And she had moved 3 times in 3 years, just kind of chasing the money. And this was a pretty accomplished person. I mean, she was one of the top people in the world at, gene expression and a couple of other things. And I just thought, this could be tough. Well, I'm in the break room one day with my friend John, who's really into motorcycles. And we were talking about motorcycles, and he said, eventually I'm going to move back to Arizona because I can ride my motorcycle more there. I was living in Utah at the time. And then he said, but I think I need to go back to school.
Okay.
And I said, okay, cool. Where do you think you're going to do that? He said, I'm thinking I'm going to go to business school. I said, great. And he said, as a matter of fact, there's an info session tonight for business school. Downtown, it's at, whatever hotel. I was thinking I'd go down there, but I don't want to go alone. Okay, John, I'll go with you. All right, let's do it. Well, I went by to see him later in the day, and he's like, hey, I'm kind of caught up on this thing, but I'll meet you down there. We were going to carpool, but we decided not to. So I drove down. That bum never showed up. So I go into the business school info session by myself. And I sat in the back, and they did their kind of song and dance. And at the end, the program director came up to me. He's like, hey, you seem kind of non-committal on the program. I said, well, I was here to support a friend who never showed up. He's like, well, maybe you didn't waste the time. Let's talk about it. And so we went into this conversation and talked about business school, what that might mean. And honestly, I'd never thought about business school really seriously before that night.
So at this point, you have an undergraduate qualification in molecular biology.
Molecular biology, yeah, from Brigham Young University.
Okay.
And now I'm like thinking about business school. And I went home. I talked to, my wife at the time and my, a couple of people I trusted, and everybody seemed to think more education was a good idea. And long story short, enrolled in business school. And
so I guess there are comparisons. I mean, like, you went into the molecular biology because you wanted to you're curious and you wanted to solve like complex problems.
Right.
I mean, there's not a huge emotional jump there between going into a finance function, coming out of that. Like, I mean, I wonder, and I think a lot of people that go into business, certainly as a postgraduate, they go into an area where they're very passionate about, and then they realize, this is really not going to be enough to satisfy, the lifestyle to which I want. So that, I mean, and that kind of happenstance as well, like where you arrange to meet somebody at a particular diner and they don't arrive. Yeah, you end up meeting the woman you marry.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that the first time it's happened?
Something like that.
So you're okay. So you're now in academia. You decide you're going to move into business school. What next? Yeah.
So, I do think what you said is important there, and that is there's sort of, I've always been curious about the world. And I think business ultimately is something you can be really curious about in a lot of different ways. And finance lends itself to that. Now, when I went to business school, I didn't
100%.
really know I was going to end up in finance. We kind of walked through the core disciplines. And at the end of that, I thought, I kind of like finance. I liked it more than operations, more than marketing. And I just kind of thought, this might be an area that I could sink my teeth into. I always liked the strategy aspect of it as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so as I went through, I noticed I gravitated to that material. I liked it more. It was more engaging for me. When I had the opportunity to take some electives, I took electives that were, in the finance track.
Yeah. And you're prior to going into molecular biology, you're high school, heavy in maths, heavy in theory or calculus. Where did you love there?
Yeah, so I ended up in I'm trying to think. Last year of high school was pre-calc, and science in New Mexico. You have to take 4 years of science. So yes, did that. I think it just seemed like that was a good way to make sense of the world. If like science was, I kind of liked the system. I liked the scientific method. I liked designing experiments. I mean, that was fun. And then working closely with a mentor in the field, collecting data and coming back to lab and kind of, running through all that. That was always very, very exciting. Even though it was it's drudgery any one day, right? Extracting samples and, doing the analysis and looking, okay, there's no change on this. But, every once in a while you look at it and you say, oh my goodness, look, there's a polymorphism in this gene and it's different. It's wow, it's like eureka. It's the
that is the curious nature. I mean, what is it they say? Science progresses every debuncle at a time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's only by finding those things are you able to progress it forward.
That's right.
So you then through happenstance you suddenly find yourself towards finance.
I ended up I graduated. Now I went to BYU's business school as well. In retrospect, if I were to give advice to somebody, I'd say, hey, go find another institution that you didn't do your undergrad at, just so you can get a whole nother kind of worldview and philosophy. But I didn't know that at the time. I wasn't smart enough, so I went to BYU.
You also mentioned a wife. Did you have any kids?
Yeah, I had 2 children while we were going through business school, or actually, during that time. So we started to build a family. And when I got done with school, I thought I want to go work for a really big company. I want to see how they do this.
Which is such a healthy way to look at it. And I wish more people would look at it that way. Yeah. Everyone I meet that's 24, 25, I want to do a startup.
Yeah, they all want to go.
I want to do my own thing. And I'm like, go get a job in a large company and learn how to operate in business first.
Yeah.
Then do it. So sorry to cut across.
Yeah, no, I didn't know it at the time, but that was it was a good choice. So I actually had interviews with a number of kind of Fortune 50 companies, and one of them was SBC Communications, which back in the day was a Baby Bell, headquartered in San Antonio, Texas. Yeah. That interview, by the way, was kind of crazy. It was a freakishly cold day in like late March, and it had started to snow. And so I'm walking into this interview
in San Antonio.
No. This is in Utah.
I was going to say that is freakish.
That would be totally freakish. Now I'm in Utah, and it's starting to snow, and I'm like accumulating snow on my jacket as I'm walking in, and I'm thinking this interview is not going to go very well because I'm covered in snow. But ended up talking to a couple of folks at SBC, and they invited me back to San Antonio, and so I came back here. Probably 4 or 5, 6 weeks later, and did in-depth interviews with the executive team. Now, I had no idea at the time who I was really talking to, but it turns out I talked to the treasurer of the company. I talked to the head of FP&A. I talked to the head of investor relations. And I talked to the individual who would eventually become the CFO.
Okay.
So, I mean, that was that, again, I didn't really know that, but those are important people who I was talking to. And they offered me a job.
Great.
And it was, I had another job offer. This one but it was with SBC Communications. It was what I wanted, a mega company. They were Fortune 20 at the time. I said, sure, sign me up. Let's do it. And they said, we're launching a new rotational program in finance. You'll be 3 years in this program, and our vision is that you'll do kind of 3 different jobs as you rotate through and figure out what makes SBC tick. And so I came to San Antonio in my first rotation, and I spent it inside of a Bell operating company.
Okay.
What I learned about Bell operating companies is that as soon as you tell somebody that you work for the phone company, they will tell you something's wrong with their phone bill. That as soon as you go to a party and say I work for the phone company, there will be a line of people. Hey, you messed up my phone bill, and we'll circle back to that. But yeah, it was kind of everybody had phone service back in the day. It's not necessarily the same now, but that was true 25 years ago. So I had this job working inside of the telco and basically doing financial forecasting for the telco. Okay. What is next month going to look like? 3 months, 6 months, a year. And there was an FP&A team that was doing their own analysis, but they wanted somebody within the business unit who was doing that as well. A lot of manual downloads out of disparate information systems, putting that into a spreadsheet, and then cranking away on the model. And the person who had the job before me didn't know Excel very well. That was apparent when I started to look at the formulas and the way it was written. So I spent 4 weeks redoing the model. And what used to be an update cycle that took 2 or 3 days now took 2 hours. I was very proud of myself. My boss was like, I don't understand the model anymore. I said, well, yeah, because I updated a few things. She was mildly upset, but got over it. Anyway, welcome to corporate America, kid. My next job at the company was I actually moved into corporate planning, so that FP&A side. And that was actually a pretty powerful team at SBC at the time because the targets that eventually went out to the business, what the chief operating officer was going to have to hit for EBITDA was generated in that FP&A team. There was like 8 or 10 of us. And again, probably did not.
So give us an idea, like when you talk about targets and you talk about business divisions here, what kind of money are we talking about?
Yeah. So, at the time, let's say the company was, $30 billion of revenue and $20 billion of operating expense and $10 or $12 billion of CapEx. My numbers aren't exactly right there. Probably $50 billion of revenue, but something in that.
So this is your second rotation with
this is my second
SBC.
rotation.
You're 26, I'll say?
Yeah, 27.
26, 27 with that kind of financial exposure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, looking at the whole company.
Yeah.
And, just big companies move slowly on everything. And I think there's, I chafed against that a little bit. But on the other hand, in their slow, deliberate way, they also kind of build a lot of momentum towards things. And so, if they say they're going to do something, they're probably going to do it.
I would agree there.
But, when I was there at SBC, there was some very interesting areas of finance. Like we had a finance team that supported the pension. So what's the pension going to, how much money do we have to put into the pension? What's it going to pay out over the next 10 years? Lots of modeling on that. We had a team that supported the organized labor contracts. What do those look like? How will they play out over the next 5 or 10 years?
I guess at that scale.
At scale, there's lots of little specialties and specialists that you kind of get to know. And sometimes, I didn't necessarily want to be that person, but I might consume some of their work product in maybe some of the things that I was doing. So I worked a year there in the FP&A. That was a good time. I picked up a mentor, Jim McGuire. Jim McGuire was from Oklahoma. He had this kind of soft-spoken voice, but he was the CFO's go-to guy for like any thorny problem that needed to be unwound. He would just call Jim McGuire. And it didn't matter that Jim wasn't working that job anymore. He just knew Jim would eventually get him an answer. And then I kind of became Jim McGuire's one of the ants, picking up rocks for him and bringing them back to the hole. So that was always fun.
The fixer for the fixer.
The fixer for the fixer. And he probably had, I was always convinced McGuire had 3 or 4 of us working on any one problem at the same time. And then when the answers crossed his desk, were 2 of them the same? He would throw those out and say, well, why are these 2 guys different than the other 2? And try to figure that out and then say, okay, I understand what your discount rate's wrong, and here's why. But McGuire, I think, helped me get into the final job that I had there, next to final, which was working in the business case team. Okay, so if you can imagine big giant corporations spending billions of dollars of capital a year, a lot of that's on autopilot, though, because if you step back and you say, hey, every year we're going to replace some portion of the phone network. So the new copper is going to go in and replace the old copper. Every year there's new homes being built in America. We got to run copper out to those. Every year there's some failure in the central office that requires us to replace electronics.
Yeah.
Okay. So all of that is sort of the autopilot spending. But then there's some portion against which there's discretion. And that portion was what my team, the business case team, was tasked with helping the corporation spend in a wise manner.
So give us a year, 2006, 2007?
This is 2005. 2005, yeah. And so, we had like $1 billion, let's call it $1 billion, $1.5 billion of discretionary capital. And every piece of capital, if you wanted to spend more than $250,000, you had to have the signature of the assistant vice president. His name was Ken Bradley.
Okay.
People called him the vice chairman because you couldn't do anything without Ken Bradley's signature. And then if it was over $1 million, you had to have the CFO sign off on it. And so, most projects were fairly sizable expenditures, as you can imagine, in a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. So almost everything went to the CFO. And the practice there was, for better or worse, the finance person did the pitch. So I would go in there, the CFO would be there, the COO, maybe 2 or 3 other folks from the business who were interested in this project. But the CFO would turn to the financial analyst and say, walk me through this case. And the business people didn't necessarily say anything. He might ask them a question. Hey, I want to validate this assumption, or where did you get that number? Actually, he would ask me where I got the numbers, but then he might say, hey, I don't agree with that. Tell me. But by and large, it was the finance person talking. And some meetings, it was finance only. In fact, there were some cases he said, I don't want any business person there. It's just a finance discussion. So I got on this cadence, again, sort of unusual, I think, now that I look back on it, where I met with the CFO 8 to 10 times a year.
Can I ask you, look, it's incredible exposure for somebody so new into a business of that size. I can absolutely see a model, something. But how do you feel about that? So disclosure, 2005, I was in telecoms. I left university. I did some time abroad. Then I came back into telecoms in a newly deregulating market in Ireland.
Right.
But half the business cases you would want to build were around sort of future strategic positioning.
Right.
Like the internet or, lease lines or network infrastructure build, et cetera. It's not always about universal service obligations to build out to houses where you can predict that there'll be $150 in spend on a monthly basis. So what happened when you came in there to a CFO with an idea that didn't have an immediate payback term?
Right.
Did they embrace those, or did they say, Peter, get out of my office?
Yeah, there's a great project here that I think illustrates that. And that was, this was the heyday of high-speed internet.
Yeah.
And the company was losing a lot of telephone service lines, but noticed that customers who had DSL, the existing technology, tend to keep their phone line longer. Okay. And so it began as, let's save the access line. And over time morphed into, we better be able to make business. We better be able to make a business in high-speed data. But it started out with, let's save the access lines. And I actually got on a project on that where the treasurer called me up and he said, hey, the CFO wants to put DSL on every access line across the footprint.
Wow.
What would that cost?
A lot.
Exactly. So I went, talked to my network guys. Of course, this is a total swag, right, Paul? This is the swaggiest swag you'll ever put together. And for some finance people, that's too much ambiguity. It's just too hard. And I think one of the things that separates finance from accounting is the accountants don't want to make that kind of, no, I will not give you a number and you can't make me give you a number. Whereas the finance people are willing to give you a number. They might qualify it a little bit, but they'll do that. So we sat down and I said, it's $4 billion. That's what it was. But we'd done some other interesting math on this. And it just turned out that there were some cheaper technologies that were available to us and that those serviced a huge number of customers. So I had done cuts at every 10% of coverage. What would it cost? from 10. Well, we were already at 40%. So it was like, 40 to 100%.
Yeah.
And the sweet spot, turns out, was 80%. You could do 80% for $600 million.
Wow.
Now, that's a lot of money, but the cash flow that's coming in from the access lines was huge.
Yep.
And it's almost 100% pure profit, right?
And it was also the cash cow that you would go to and say this a line increase.
Exactly.
I mean, it was a constantly serving servant.
And it's the thing that drives everything else, right? I can't sell them call waiting if they don't have the access line, or high-speed data, whatever it is. And so he had not asked me to prepare that. So, for your listeners and people thinking about that, I think it's always helpful to not only answer the question that they have, but you might anticipate what are some other questions that they're going to have based on the analysis I'm giving them.
Yeah, it's great advice.
And anticipating that, in this case, turned out that I had a ready answer for him. And I said, look, it's $600 million for 80%, and that's what I would recommend if you were going to do this. He said, how sure are you of that? I said, well, I mean, it's qualified, but network guys are bought off on the 4 billion, and we walked down to this number together. Yeah, I think we're pretty close. He called me up later that afternoon. He said, we're going to earmark $600 million for this footprint expansion.
This is the CFO of SBC.
The treasurer. Okay. The treasurer had talked to the CFO and gotten it approved. I mean, Paul, I've been in my career where I was trying to get, $100,000 approved, and it took 6 weeks.
Yeah.
600 million took one phone call in an afternoon. And just the way things worked out, I sort of became one of several people that had a lot of administrative authority over that budget for the time that I was there. And so we had a lot of network guys doing build outs based on projections that were ultimately put together by our business case team. And, we were running on this project that, again, on paper, maybe didn't have a great return. But if I started to include some of the ancillaries and the other things, and I said, hey, if every customer just lasted 3 more months because they had high-speed data, now it started to make a lot more sense from a cash flow basis.
That era in telecom, so that was the last great era. Everything went downhill after that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the year of the DSLAM, when we were looking at moving away from ISDN, you're going into that DSLAM kind of DSL kind of world. And then the over-the-top services coming in. I mean, now I still have friends in the telecoms area. It's very difficult. It's an incredibly difficult area to be operating in now. And that was the last real party. So I think you got out pretty soon after that. Did you see the writing on the wall, or was it just a large opportunity?
Well, I mean, you could see, so SBC ended up buying AT&T Wireless, merging that with their property, right? And then they bought AT&T Communications, took their name. Then they bought Bell South, right? And then they bought DirecTV or Dish Network. DirecTV. Which one? They bought Direct. Anyway, all trying to build the vertical side of it, right? In content delivery. Yeah. And then in the ultimate play, the telephone company bought an entertainment company, right? They bought Time, which essentially was HBO and a whole bunch of other top flight media properties, which, anybody would have told you this is the oddest marriage to ever have happened. Even weirder than AOL Time Warner. I mean, so Time Warner's been on two really weird ones, but yes, the AT&T Bellhead guys really have a strong vision for where content should go globally.
Yeah.
And we've seen that unwound in the last 3 or 4 years, but I got out long before then.
Yeah.
It was a great apprenticeship to see really a lot of different things across a vast enterprise and work with a lot of talented people. So, and maybe the one thing I took away from there was in these giant corporations, for whatever their faults are, many of them have collected talented people. They may not be able to, move at the speed of a startup or make decisions and have the velocity in others, but there's still smart people running these companies.
I entirely agree. And what I'd say to the listeners, like if not mid-level, not like mid-30s looking to make the jump, if you're early to mid-20s and you're currently sitting in a startup that's spinning and you're wondering why, listen to Peter. Get into an organization which can show you the ropes practically. And over a 3-year period, like a $600 million project budget approval in an afternoon, that's a huge confidence builder, if nothing else.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And the people in these organizations, we may cast them aside, but they are bright people.
Right.
And these are successful companies with large EBITDAs. So that's the point I'd make here. Like the purpose of this podcast is to help people jump into the senior management team. But given what you've just said here, I also like that kind of advice, heed it. Yeah. Like learn business before you think you know everything.
Yes. Yeah. And I think broad exposure really helped me.
Really helped.
Yeah, for sure. And I mentioned, I had some people who mentored me along the way, and, that's helpful too. When people,
yes,
take an interest in your career, make sure you get exposure to things, and, that you have the opportunity to maybe shine when you need to shine. I mean, I still remember I had I had a unique project. We had spent over $100 million on the billing system, and
we've given me goosebumps. Like the Helicopter Days billing system.
We had spent
horror show.
We had spent so we spent all this money on the billing system, and then we'd spent all this money trying to tie call centers together. And my boss called me in and he said, "Hey, we've got to go show what we're getting for all this money we spent." He said, "Do you want to do billing system or the call centers?" And
tell me you didn't choose billing systems.
I did. I thought that thing's a disaster at every level.
Yeah.
I'll take the call center stuff.
Cool. Probably equally as disastrous. But
equally disastrous. Well, it turns out, I did my analysis, and the head of call centers, he was in San Antonio at the time. He could not have disagreed more with my analysis. And I set this meeting to go show him and walk him through all the assumptions, why I thought we were right. I was supposed to have my boss there supporting me, and my boss bowed out at the last minute. So it's me, junior analyst, with senior vice president of, telco operations, getting my earful. That meeting ended when he said, "This whole thing's BS," got up from behind his desk and came and slammed the door. And then I'm sitting in his office, which is now just me. And then his admin walks in and says, I think you need to leave, you should leave now. And like, okay. And my boss asked me what happened. I said, "Oh, he blew up." And he's really mad. He's like, "Yeah, I kind of expected that." I was like, "Well, where were you, bro? Like, where's my wingman?
You weren't with me?
Why weren't you with me?" I said, "Do you think we need to make changes?" He said, No, it's a sound analysis. So we actually took that to the CFO, and he sat through the CFO meeting and said nary a peep, didn't yell at the CFO. Anyway, again, unique opportunity to really step back and think about the business from an operational perspective and say, what are the investments actually doing?
Yeah.
We said they would do these 5 things. How are they doing? It was a scorecard of how they were doing against those 5 things. And the answer was, well, not very well. That was great. I liked AT&T. I was one of 6,000 finance professionals, one at 3,000 at my level. And at some point I was like, I could probably make a career here, but I will die.
Yeah.
And it will just crush me, because there was a lot of, disappointment in things that we didn't move forward on, or things that I thought were important. Interesting, one of the things I worked on when I was there was this new thing that they were standing up. It was co-location and co-hosting. where we would build a building.
Now I see a path to
Yeah.
Yes.
So we would build a building, and then we would kind of let people come in and put their servers, and we would have power. And when describe this to people, they would just scratch their head and say, "Who's going to do this? This is nuts." Anyway, so
this is the story of the gentleman that owned the building in San Antonio, and three young guys came in and explained it to him.
That's right.
The gentleman was Graham West, and the three were Dirk and the lads, and Rackspace was born.
And Rackspace was born.
Yeah.
And I ended up at Rackspace, a decade later into that. Graham would always say it was a real estate business, Rackspace. It was a service business on top of a real estate business. But I sort of got restless, and I wanted to go do something else. I wanted a little more responsibility. I could see that grinding out business cases was wasn't exactly what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. At that time, I had a recruiter call me, pitch me a couple of different jobs. I went to one of them, talked to the people there, and it was a life sciences company here in San Antonio called Kinetic Concepts Inc., KCI for short, rebranded itself into Acelity a few years after that, and then has since merged with 3M. 3M Medical. But it was a standalone company then. And
size, revenue?
When I joined, probably 5,000 people, and it was about $2 billion in revenue globally.
So big
company, and had a global franchise in wound healing.
Okay.
Did I say 5,000? 5,000 is too many, but it's probably more like 3,000. But, back to molecular biology and biology, this was like the interface of finance and biology. It was kind of a cool company.
Yeah.
And, at AT&T, when you tell people you work for SBC or AT&T, it's always, hey, my bill was wrong.
Because it always was.
Because it always was. At KCI, people would say, you saved my mom's leg.
Interesting.
Or you saved my sister, or something like that. I mean, it was these dramatic stories. And I was on an airplane one time, and a guy saw my shirt, and he just shook my hand, and he said, KCI, you guys saved my wife's leg. Well, the technology was really good at healing wounds. And as you get older, you're more prone, especially if you have some comorbidities like heart disease or diabetes, and getting wounds like a sore that doesn't heal on your foot.
Yeah.
And standard of care is that, they'll put gauze on there and try and heal it. But if it doesn't heal and ultimately becomes a source of kind of infection for the rest of your body, they'll amputate part of your foot, or your whole foot, or your leg. And the technology, the wound vac, actually helped to treat these hard to treat wounds and brought a lot of people back from the brink. So people who had severe diabetic foot ulcers could find relief and healing through this technology. So it's pretty cool.
So we had a former guest talking about mission-based businesses.
Yeah.
And how he wouldn't work in one which wasn't. He's currently in Grassroots Carbon, which is a carbon sequestering business, which is here in San Antonio. So removing carbon from the atmosphere, replacing it into the earth.
Right.
And he has sworn he will not work unless it's a mission-based business.
Right.
So there is a lot to be said for that kind of emotion when you're doing your daily.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Right. There's a huge payoff, right?
Yes.
We actually helped a person yesterday.
Yes. As opposed to send them an errand bill.
Yeah, as opposed to misbilling them. Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. So that was a fun company, and I had a succession of roles there. When I came on board, I sort of had a job that was fairly narrow in scope, and there was another gentleman who was hired at the same time. And I realized the job they hired him to do wasn't really a full-time job. He was supposed to run a forecast inside of a tool.
Okay.
And I figured out that tool, and, it took a little while, but I figured it out, and I kind of went to him. I said, hey, here's how to load that tool and make it work. And he could never quite grasp how it really worked at its core. So eventually he left, and then they gave me that responsibility. And so now I was running kind of the forecast for at least the US part of the corporation, as well as doing some other FP&A tasks. after a while, they gave me kind of the business analytics piece of that. And that was really important. That put me into a role where I got to see kind of the daily hum of the business in a way that I hadn't. Because even at the telco, I'd been a little bit abstracted from that.
Yeah.
But at KCI, man, I was looking at operational metrics every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. You know, where are we sitting with how many orders have come in? What's the backlog? You know, what teams today have collected money? Which teams have not? One of our key questions in that business was always, how much money are we going to get paid? And, you know, the business I work in today, if I have receivables that are more than 6 months old, I think they're suspect. You know, I would
entirely agree.
I would write them off, you know.
Okay.
In the KCI business, we had receivables that were 2 years old.
Wow.
So
is that part of the model? Is that within medical?
So here's the challenge in healthcare, right? Is I send the insurance company a bill and they send back and say, hey, you didn't fully document.
Okay.
I go get some more documents, resend the bill. Well, we want to contest this, right? And we're going back and forth. An insurance company or government hasn't paid the bill. And so one of the key questions was, of all these receivables that I'm holding, how much cash am I actually going to get out of them? Because that 2-year-old AR yielding cash actually gives me revenue today, because I'm allowed to recognize whatever I think ultimately I will collect in cash. Does this make sense?
It does.
So if I send a bill for $100 today, do I book it at $85 of revenue or $75 of revenue? And that question, as important as it is, will not be answered for 2 years.
Okay.
So that was something that we worked on a lot in that business, was how do we yield as much cash as quickly as possible out of the receivables? And then with what's left, how do we increase the yield on that? And then at some point, there is some expenditure of effort for which the outcome is not worth it. And so when do you decide no more into this pile of receivables? Because collecting the documents or talking to the doctors or getting that errant prescription that we don't have just takes time and effort on our part, and the yield maybe isn't going to offset what that would be. And so thinking about that decision too, like when do we write off and when do we say operationally, don't touch this anymore?
And in a $2 billion business, you're talking significant funds.
Yeah, lots of money. Tens
What
of
kind of
millions.
margin were you working to in that business?
That business, in a bad year, the U.S. business was 55 or 60% margins. Yeah, it was incredible.
That's incredible.
It was incredible.
Okay, I understand.
Right.
Like,
so chasing all that cash made a lot of sense.
Made a lot of sense. Yeah. I mean, that's Okay. A lot of our companies that we would do business with on the Centage side, they would be healthcare businesses running 4 to 5% margins.
Right.
So if they get something wrong in terms of cash collection or forward forecast and projections, they can very easily move into a deficit.
Right.
So that was I'm looking, going, when is the right time to start writing off cash in a business that has a low margin? But your margin is exceptional, so I understand.
Yeah. What funny things happen though in that business? Some of the people who listen to this undoubtedly touch tax from time to time. And back then, the U.S. had everything's changed, but it was a worldwide tax regime. And one of the things we did to minimize tax was we moved some of the IP offshore to an entity in Malta and into Ireland.
Okay.
And then we set a transfer price. And I remember I opened up the financial statements for the latest quarter, listened to the call, and I noticed that we had drawn cash on one of the revolving instruments. This in a quarter where we had generated probably the second highest amount of cash that we'd ever generated. So why would we go into debt on a revolver when I had so much cash?
Okay.
So I went to the head of FP&A and I said, hey, you guys set the transfer price wrong, didn't you? And she laughed. She said, how do you know that? I said, well, there's only one reason why you would bring cash from the revolver in this quarter where we had near record cash. And that is you didn't have enough cash in the U.S. entity to pay the bills. And she laughed and she said, yeah, you're right. So we had to draw down in the bank with our cash that was in the US because we were stuffing so much money overseas into Ireland and Malta and these other places.
You had one of those post boxes in the International Financial Services Centre in Dublin 1.
Exactly.
Yes,
Exactly.
yes.
That's where all the money went.
Absolutely.
And, and it was like year 1 or 2 of that particular taxation. I hate to call it a scheme, but that's what it was. And we just hadn't gotten used to it. And the forecast or whatever was not right on all the moving parts. And so we had left the U.S. entity without enough cash. Anyway,
it's funny.
Just funny
Even
things
the best,
that
brightest teams can make mistakes.
Yeah, make mistakes from time to time. And, it's like sometimes when you read financial statements, you kind of see some of these things and light bulbs should go off. Why are they doing that? There's got to be some reason.
So I always think of financial statements. It digresses a little bit, right? But if you humor me, it's like looking at the matrix. Okay, we will look at companies from an investment or acquisition perspective over say 6 years. Okay, who've had 2 or 3 rounds of investment going in.
Sure,
and you can see from the financial statements, like at the point in time when different investors came in. Like you'll see the initial investor and they'll fire hose money at sales and marketing. So you'll see this giant spike.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Then you'll see the next investor come in and that'll disappear and the finance function will increase as they look to consolidate what they have and take costs out of the business.
Sure.
And then you see the next one come in and there'll be a marginal increase in sales and marketing, but there'll be a large increase in revenue.
Sure.
And then you'll know this maturity. So, but you don't see any notes in terms of who was behind the business at that point in time, but the way the financials work out and the way that the models look, you can, yes, I see that. That's when Battery came in and dropped a whole load of money in and told them like, sell.
That's right.
This is when, Fincor came in and they wanted to consolidate. Yes. So it's interesting on the financials. Talk to us about Rackspace.
Yeah. So I left KCI. KCI went private. And eventually I kind of said, this isn't exactly what I want to do. And I had friends who had moved over to Rackspace and they kept talking to me, hey, just chirping, hey, come over.
So give us a date.
Finally, I moved in 2015.
2015.
Yeah. And Rackspace at that time, was the second largest cloud provider in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, that should blow everybody's mind.
Yeah.
We were doing that from San Antonio, Texas. So cloud computing had gone from being kind of this, interesting, funny thing that Amazon was doing to, actually, maybe we can do real stuff to, no, people are launching businesses on top of this now. And, Amazon Web Services, AWS, became the fastest company to $10 billion of revenue, the fastest to 25, and now it's the fastest to 50. I mean, it's just this monster. And in the meantime, Google's launched cloud, was launching cloud, and so was Microsoft. And so, but the bread and butter of Rackspace was always hosted solutions. So it was a data center, basically, where there was lots of servers, and you could buy a server.
Yeah.
And you could rent it. And you could rent it for nominal price. And you did, we wanted people to sign contracts, but here's the deal. When I got there, like 70% of the customer base didn't have a contract because they had gone on an initial contract and it had run out. And now they're just going month to month. And really that core business for Rackspace was maybe a SMB.
Yeah.
And they had huge share there of, people who needed computing power for whatever reason, websites, running whatever process. And, we're looking to Rackspace to basically abstract away the data center operations.
So we spoke, we had Carl Bickler, who was the CFO.
Yeah, he was my boss there.
Yeah. And he left at that point. At that point, Apollo would come in. It was a leveraged $4.5 billion buyout. So a lot of the founders came in. His story of Rackspace is one of growth. Now, 2015, you're now in the sands are shifting at that point in time.
Yeah.
Amazon Web Services are the first to 10 billion. They're incredibly aggressive. I remember the launch. I had a hosting business back in Ireland called Hosting 365. So you're now dealing with an entirely different situation. Private equity are in. You're in a defensive kind of hold right now against this unbelievably aggressive and viral-based competitor in AWS. Strategically, how did you manage that?
Yeah. So the company had really fought, the hallmark of Rackspace was great services.
Yeah.
And
Fanatical support.
Yeah. Fanatical support. And the company had really fought not putting services on AWS. And then we did the about face and said, no, let's go do services on AWS. So I think if you rewind it, number one, Rackspace could be the number one cloud provider in the world today. The problem, the challenge is, I don't think it was ever explained to the board of directors what it would take in the cloud business. Now, I don't think the Rackspace leadership necessarily knew, but I do think, sometimes you see something and it's going to be big, and I think it's okay to say it's going to be a gigantic number. I think AI is like that. Steve Jobs and his iPhone were like that. I mean, Steve Jobs just looked at the current market for cell phones and said, if we have 1%, it's 10 million units. We think we can do that. Well, I mean, now he's what, 25 or 50%? I mean, he's some huge percent of the market. But you know what I mean? Like, sitting with his board of directors and saying, listen, we're going to spend a lot of money on this, but even a modicum of success will mean that it's a multiple of our size today. I think in cloud computing, that was also visible. I just think it was hard for that management that has sort of, grown. But, and Carl may have told you this, Rackspace took in money in the IPO, and that essentially funded the growth. And then the rest of the growth came from, customers and everything else. I mean, it's an incredible business, that hosting business. It did not require an exogenous infusion of capital to grow.
It didn't. It's 20 million was the initial capital input from Graham.
Yeah. And they did it, And amazing. So I think the cloud business was going to be a lot different than that. Hey, here's the cloud business in a nutshell. I need to spend $500 million to $1 billion a year just to keep features going. That's not data centers. That's nothing else. That's just the software piece of it.
Yeah.
Securing it, make sure it has cool features, making sure that, people can run their stuff. Then all the data centers, which is super heavy in hardware and won't be full for a while, need to be stood up too. And by the way, we can't stand these up one at a time. We need to do about, 40 of them to cover the globe because we want to be a global provider. I mean, you can see a board being kind of skeptical and maybe pushing.
Particularly when the business is performing so well.
Yes. When margins
are changing everything.
Yeah. Why do you guys want to do that? Yeah. So I could see that. And Rackspace brought in some outside people to head up this new business. And I was the finance support for the new business. Hey, let's get the new person who's not, and
the guys you brought in, Matt Tanasi, these guys are great guys.
They're good. Yeah. They're smart.
Yeah.
And so we started to sell services on AWS, and on Microsoft Azure, and on Google. The challenge is the margins are a lot lower on that. And so we were, in essence, cannibalizing a hosting business with really great margins for a, cloud services business that didn't, had so-so margins.
Yeah, the margins and the cash is quicker around cloud services. But once you move beyond the ROI model within dedicated and fixed hosting, the margins are exceptional.
Right.
So it is a very difficult. I mean, I remember when that decision was made. It's a difficult one.
Yes.
But it's hard to know what the right path would have been. What was the feeling and the culture within Rackspace at the time? Within the finance team, did you feel that it was the right move, or was there frustration? Or
there was a lot. I'd say about half the team was like, "Hey, we just need to double down on hosting, and the dedicated business will be there forever." Because there are some workloads that probably don't move to the cloud. For instance, your local bank, the big banks. JP Morgan probably isn't doing a lot in the cloud. Yeah. Goldman Sachs isn't doing a lot in the cloud, right? Yeah. They're doing it. But the challenge is those guys are actually doing enough that they can run their own data centers.
Yeah.
So they're only going to buy a little bit of capacity from somebody like Rackspace as an overflow, while they're, figuring out where do they put their next data center. And so there was kind of this internal debate about how much should the dedicated hosting business subsidize the cloud business for how long? And, is the dedicated hosting business, is it an iceberg? Is it a melting iceberg? Yeah. And how fast? And the answer is it's absolutely an iceberg. And it's probably going to accelerate in how fast it's melting. And we saw that, in any business like this, you see it with new customer, new starts almost immediately, right? They dry up. All the new business goes to the new thing, which was cloud. And then really what propels growth in the mature business is existing customers adding more stuff. But eventually they start to taper that down, and then the growth goes to nothing, and then it's negative because everybody's leaving, right? They're not only not adding, that they're leaving.
The leaky bucket.
Yeah, so, the leaky bucket. And so I think if you're a financial analyst and you're looking at it's not good enough just to look at, hey, what is my overall growth? That's not good enough. You've got to look at the same store sales metric. What is that? And the new sales. What is that? And, are those things moving as they have before? Is there a change in one? Why is it changing? And if the installed base begins to propel all of the growth and you're not adding new, that's direct market feedback telling you something is gobbling up the new. Where's it going? You better go investigate.
So that comparison is exactly what's happening today with AI.
Sure.
You're seeing existing kind of strong SaaS businesses that have strong positive NRR, net retention rate.
Right.
However, new business is flowing into AI-enabled providers. So, I mean, I think the disruption with AI will be bigger. But I think there's a lot of similarities between the two.
Sure.
So at this point, you get to divisional CFO level. So you make that jump.
Right.
You get to the C level. Are you heard? From a strategic perspective, you're at the table now. Are they listening? Are they taking direction? Because everything you've said is on point.
Yeah.
So
we had the executive team meeting, weekly there. I wasn't a standing team member, but I was frequently there talking about the business. Were we heard? Ultimately, I felt like my voice wasn't heard, and so I left. And I thought that we were a little too cautious on the way we were approaching cloud. So let's say the minimum efficient scale for the dedicated hosting business is you need $50 million. Well, in the cloud business, it's probably $1 billion or $2 billion. So let's not talk about how much the margins and how much money the business is making today. It's sort of irrelevant when we're sub 250 million or sub 500 million, right? This thing is going to print money at some point, but it won't right now. And it's because we're subscale. And that was, again, a lot of these people were like, well, no, but, dedicated, we made money when the building was, 40% full. That, forget that.
Yes.
We need
the world is different now.
We need a giant vacuum cleaner of all the new leads that are going into Amazon, and we need to sell everybody one service, something. What's our hook? And that was the other thing is I think there was kind of a lack of strategic vision about. We had always been a Cadillac provider, call it, right? Like you signed up for Rackspace, you got fanatical support, and that meant a whole long list of things that we were going to do for you. Well, on cloud, you can still be the Cadillac provider, but it turns out there's not a lot of people buying Cadillacs because the early adopters and the early majority on cloud are a little bit more technically savvy.
Sure.
They just don't need the same level of hand-holding that the dedicated late majority needed.
Yeah.
So you've got to innovate on what are we actually offering these people. And I think part of that was need to have a couple of services that are fairly low price but high value that everybody says, oh yeah, we want that. Yeah, we'll take that. And then that becomes the Trojan horse, right, over time for selling perhaps more services on top of that. I just think the company had so much leverage into the hardware. It was hard for them to move into services and see that they could have the same leverage. It just wasn't as visible, if you know what I'm saying. Like in hardware, the leverage is incredibly visible. In services, it's not. And it was hard for people to make that leap conceptually, and it was hard to make that leap strategically in the spending plans for the company.
I think before we move on to Plus Robotics, I also think one of the things that Amazon got right was the utility billing model that they rolled out.
Yeah.
I mean, that was groundbreaking stuff in 2006.
Yeah.
I remember I was at HostingCon in Chicago, and Amazon were giving a keynote, and we were all there, your Rackspaces, your Softlayers, your The Planet, these guys, right? And we were all mocking. Why is an e-retailer, why is a bookseller giving a keynote at a hosting conference? And the guy stood up and he presented the usage in terms of their computers coming up to Christmas, and then their usage in January, where it was non-existent.
Yeah.
And he said they were going to use hypervisors, Hyper-V or whatever it was, to compartmentalize each of the individual servers and sell them on a utility basis. So you would only pay for what you use, not what was deployed.
Right.
No one was laughing then.
Yeah.
It was like an old-fashioned movie where the journalists were running out to the phone, so they were ringing back to head office, or like, ring a banker.
Yeah.
So like really interesting, and it's great to get a perspective in terms of the latter years in terms of Rackspace. You moved on from Rackspace?
I moved on to Rackspace. I actually moved back into so Rackspace had 3 co-founders. One of them was a guy named Morris Miller.
Yeah.
And Morris had wandered off from Rackspace and was doing a whole bunch of different things, but he had a company that was doing hospital disinfection systems using ultraviolet C light. And, that kind of scratched my biology itch. And I went
back to microbiology.
I'm back there. I got hired on, and I'm not kidding you. I got hired the same week the COVID pandemic started. And I walked into that company. We had less than $1 million of cash in the bank. And I thought, holy cow, my biggest problem is going to be collecting on some receivables and having enough to make payroll. And within about 6 weeks, our biggest problem was, how do we get parts through the supply chain fast enough to assemble robots? Because everybody in the world wants a disinfecting robot.
100%.
Yeah. I mean, it was crazy.
So give me Napoleon. Give me lucky generals, not good ones.
Yeah, exactly. That was a great ride. I mean, exhausting for the first year, tapered off. I realized an important thing, Paul, and that is he brought in a CFO over me. I was acting CFO. He brought a CFO over me. That always kind of rankled me a little bit. I understood, though, what he was doing, and that was he was trying to prepare the company for, a transaction, and he wanted somebody who knew the business. I get it. That guy left. I became acting CFO again, but I realized I was not aligned with the CEO, and it's good to have a little bit of tension, I think, in the executive suite. It's okay to have maybe slightly different visions, but it's not good to have wholesale different visions. And I pitched a couple of different plans to Morris, and one of them was more of a utility model on what we were selling. At the time, we were selling as a capital sale, and it was a huge expense for a hospital. I mean, even a medium-sized hospital would need $1 million of robots. Well, $1 million is a serious amount of money.
Yeah, it's $1 million.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're talking to a CFO at that point. You know what I mean? I tried to explain to him, hey, but for whatever reason, Morris didn't want to do that. And he was well acquainted with that utility model as well. And I just, at the end there, I thought, you know what? He needs somebody who can faithfully execute his vision for him. And so I moved on to Plus One Robotics.
Okay.
And I had been pitched some different CFO jobs. And then when this one came along, and I met the management team, I got excited, and because they were doing cool stuff. Just briefly, our company uses an AI module running inside of an industrial computer. So it's a local, not a cloud asset, and uses commercially available cameras or sensors to examine images and hand off instructions to a robot. And when I say robot, I'm talking about a robotic arm. So payload could be anywhere from 4 to, let's say, 100 pounds. So I'm picking up giant, crates of things, or maybe a flat, like a piece of mail, and sorting that. And so the core technology here is really, how do you, from a pile of many, take one? And how do you tell the AI system where the edges of something are, how to pick it up, how to use enough force that, you can grab it, but not too much force. Nobody likes having their boxes smashed, turns out. Or you can break the robot. And then maybe orienting and placing it in a certain manner on a conveyor belt or another robot, or maybe a pallet, something like that. And my boss, but the CEO at Eric Nieva is my boss now. He has this thing he says, we're human exceptionalists. We think humans are better at this stuff than the robots. And, AI gets confused from time to time. What do? Well, +1 robotics, the +1 is a human being. And we use what we call supervised autonomy. And that is, the robot calls home and says, what do I do? And we have cool technology yonder where there's a person at a screen, crew chief, that when the robot needs help, they click a button, they can see exactly what the robot sees. And then they just click on something, they say, hey, pick this thing up in this orientation. The robot does that and moves on its merry way. We don't have a lot of interventions. I mean, in some applications, it's less than 1 an hour. But for our customers, stopping the line and not having the robot work for a minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes is incredibly costly. So the supervised autonomy is really a cool,
I think it's
a cool concept. And, it works.
Well, that's a very practical solution to a real problem.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So
what do you do when AI fails?
Yes.
Yeah, you fall back to a human being.
And AI fails.
AI fails.
Yeah. I mean, be it a hallucination or not. The other side to this, the practical applications of AI and robotics is mind-blowing.
Oh, yeah.
So to be at the cutting edge of this, the bleeding edge, it's an exciting time. I love the concept of having supervised autonomy. Like it's a very practical solution.
Yeah.
But where you can bring this is utterly, I mean, that's a podcast all on its own.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So where that goes, I mean, we start with robotic arms, get into humanoid-based robots, get into advanced AI models. Also, the one thing that really blows my mind with AI as well is that we're all choosing models. So I'm moving a little bit away from the robotics for a second. I'll bring it back. But like we'll sit here on the 26th of May or whatever the date is today, and we'll say, okay, today we're all going to use Claude because Claude 7 is so good and ChatGPT is terrible. And 2 weeks from now, ChatGPT will have a launch. We all go, oh, ChatGPT is incredible again. Right? We all need to stop using Claude. We all need to move back to ChatGPT. Like it is the rate of evolution, the rate of progression in terms of the algorithms in AI right now is
it's staggering.
It's terrifying and staggering all at the same time. So I mean, what a cool business to be in.
Yeah.
So
I agree. And, I'll just parenthetically add here. I remember we had one of our quality people, she did a presentation. It was really excellent at one of our meetings. And we talked about model training. And, the AI is only as good as the data that runs through it.
Yep.
And so have to be careful. Not all images in what we do, not all images are created equal. And she had done different libraries of different images and then trained the model and then run it through a package set. And she'd run through enough samples that it was statistically significant. And she showed us that there were actually 6 bunches of images that she had randomly, put together that actually made the robot worse. Okay. So, if you think about AI, like where are some of the jobs going to be? there's a massive QA job that will need to be done. Like you said, hey, these robots or the AI models are being released into the wild. Well, somebody had to say it was better than what exists today.
Yep.
And it wasn't AI itself. It was like a human being who was doing some of that work. And, thinking around, what do you expose the LLM to? What is the base data that actually makes this a smarter, better robot? Because it isn't in every case more data that's going to solve the problem. Anyway, to me, that's fascinating. And one thing we've learned over time is it's not just more data, but it's having the right data that really makes for a great AI model.
So we always say AI will get you to the wrong decision quicker with inaccurate data.
Yeah.
I think, incidentally, like building data sets or having like a Snowflake kind of business, having a data fabric based business that specializes in LLMs and AI will be the shovels that were sold for the gold rush.
Yeah, that's right.
That's
right.
Bad data in, bad data out. You know what I mean? It's that particular area I find super interesting.
Right.
Like we're rolling out any number of AI features right now in terms of our platform and our tool. But as an FP&A platform, like if the data is wrong, the scenarios are going to be wrong.
Yeah.
So, and basically you will compound a bad decision.
Yeah.
Far quicker and probably to the greater detriment to the business without proper accurate data set. So
yes.
I couldn't agree more with it. Like it's a fascinating area.
Yeah.
I think let's talk about AI in terms of the future of finance in a minute.
Sure.
I think we again, I get the impression that we could probably talk about this for 4 hours.
Yeah. You're right.
So,
you're right. So I think one thing, going back thinking about my career, mentors have been important. Also, though, like just getting some exposure is important too. And I think back to KCI, I had some exposure to the board at KCI. I think that was important. At Rackspace, had some exposure to some board members. At Zenix, where I worked with Morris, definitely, I kind of took over board reporting and did a lot of that. And, at Plus One, where I'm at now, that's a big part of the job. Anyway, I think, as a junior person, when you're offered the opportunity to work on maybe that special project that seems like it's a lot more work, maybe say yes, because you don't know where that might end up. And you might end up in an SVP's office, or you might end up on the phone with a board member who actually had this question and asked the business, and there wasn't a satisfactory answer, and it ended up being me who provided the answer, or at least said, we don't know the exact answer, but we can box it in between these two values, and there's value to that sometimes too. Anyway, the thing about Plus One, it was supervised autonomy, is a lot of people kind of ridiculed that idea. And they said, well, no, AI is going to be great enough that it'll just work all the time. And now we've turned full circle where everybody's like, yeah, supervised autonomy, of course. Makes complete sense.
I've been saying that forever, Peter. Like,
I was just saying,
talking about I've always been on board with this.
But if you think about, what are some of the applications where an exception happens, often enough that the AI will get confused? Well, there's a ton of them. But if you could put AI in the loop, man, now you got something that's super, super powerful, and can be rolled out almost, ubiquitously. So I think there's a number, like you said, we could talk about applications. Here's a fun one. A friend of mine was selling sensor systems to a theme park.
Okay.
And they put sensors into all the trash cans to measure how full they are.
Okay.
So they have a real-time cloud-enabled trash map of the park. Okay.
Okay.
But what they found is they could predict with 100% accuracy where people were congregating by the rate of change of accumulation in the trash can. So what started out as a project to, hey, just empty the trash cans a little more frequently so it doesn't look trashy, became, we have people in that corner of the park, go send some food carts that way, maybe send a medical team, maybe send extra security, because we have people accumulating there.
Why are they accumulating?
Yeah. And why are they there? So, it started with, can we get, consistent data on this one part of our business to, hey, now we're changing the operations a little bit because the data is consistent and it actually is correlated with something we care about.
That's cool.
So, I mean, that's sort of a, AI, think about all the things that you don't have time to look at as a human being, but AI could look at it and just raise its hand and say, hey, we've hit an exception that's somewhat unusual. Maybe you ought to look at this.
It's great. Listen, let's go back for 1 second, okay? In terms of your first CFO role, okay, when you moved into that strategic chair, was there very often there isn't a eureka moment, there isn't a moment like this is hard work, this is putting your hand up, this is saying I want the project and stuff.
Right.
It's not a huge, is there one thing that you can say for that divisional CFO role you got in Rackspace? Why did they choose you? Because you're that was a large, maybe it wasn't the 6,000 that you were working with in SBC, but these were large finance teams with some of the most intelligent and best finance people I've ever known. I've never worked in Rackspace, but I worked with a lot of ex-Rackers.
Right. Yeah, and they're smart people.
Smart people. So why you? What did you do differently? Why did you stand out? You're mid-level. You're stuck in a manager, a director role. How do you make that jump?
Yeah, I think I have this curiosity about things, and it's sort of annoying to some people and endearing to others. But I keep asking questions, and just keep asking, and sometimes I find things that just don't fit the fact pattern, and I file that away and I start thinking, well, how could that make sense? Or in what reference frame does that thing start to make sense? I think that's a useful skill. And I think people at Rackspace kind of noticed that maybe I had a different tilt on the business and the way I thought about it and the way I chased problems to ground. The other thing is I've always thought as the finance team, we're supporting a business and work to make that business successful. There's no finance team and then the business. There's no points that I'm going to score that don't also, advance the team. And I think having a team first mentality really at Rackspace, that was key too. I'm not saying that people had fiefdoms, but occasionally there were fiefdoms that we would run up against, and people were kind of, hey, you're asking me to do something and that's a product thing, you need to go talk to product because they're the ones who have to fix that, and it's like, well, but you're an operations person. Don't you care about the customer outcome? Don't you care that our customer is going to be down for a little while because of this thing?
But those people that build silos around themselves never progress.
No, I mean, they don't, but they, sadly, you find them in every org. And again, I don't want to say that Rackspace was like that. I just think that I had the ability to reframe things as not your problem, but our problem. And I think people always appreciate that. They always appreciate, hey, okay, finance is going to help me on this and not fight me on it. If that makes sense.
I think it's great advice. I think I'd lean into it and I'd sort of say, those in finance that don't progress are the ones that want to report why things happened. The strategic finance guys are the ones that they're not looking to report. They're looking to guide decision making.
Yeah.
Use real-time data to guide the right decisions to drive the right outcomes. And that takes curiosity.
Yes.
That's a different mindset. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Also, you need to be confident in the business's faith in you when you're wrong, because you're not always going to be right.
Mm-hmm.
It's simple to report the news. It happened.
Right.
It's very difficult to predict an outcome. I'm putting your neck on the line and saying, this is a 600, they say in 2 billion, we can get it done for 600 million. We're looking between the 40 and 80. That's all. That this isn't a 100% investment. It's a 40% investment against this. And this is the fallback position in terms of access lines.
Right.
It's a ballsy move.
Yeah.
For somebody that's 3 years into a company the size of SBC and one of 3,000 in the same role. I guess, is it
So
take risks.
Yeah,
take measured risks.
I think what you said is right. I used to have a SVP come by and he'd say, the difference between the great finance people is the good ones tell me the news, and they can even tell me tomorrow's news.
Yeah,
but the great ones make the news.
Yeah,
right. That's how he said it, and I think that's right.
That's the right way to put it.
Kind of, here's the facts today, but here's how it's changing, or it might change, or here's how we could change it if we did these things. Is that taking risks? Yeah, absolutely. It has to be. But I mean, look, every business has to take risks. I mean, the core concept from all of finance is the risk-free rate is whatever it is. And if you don't take risks, that's what you're going to get. Well, there's no company in America that's happy with the risk-free rate. So guess what? You got to go take some risks.
Yes, absolutely.
And sometimes, I think this is important too. Oftentimes companies have proprietary insights where you actually have more data and a more understanding of what's happening than literally anybody else. I don't need Gartner to tell me what's happening. You know why? Because I can go look at my new starts and I can look at my install base and I can tell in 2 minutes exactly what's happening in this market long before the Gartner report comes out.
Well, and far cheaper.
And for far cheaper. And now I can go action that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think for all of these, for better or worse, in finance, have an opinion. It's like you said, it's okay. It's okay to be wrong.
It's okay to be wrong.
The Marine Corps says if you have 70% of the intelligence that you need, 70% of the people that you need, and you're 70% certain that whatever you're going to do is right, go do that thing. And you multiply all those things together, and it's like less than half. And you're like, well, wait a second. But it's that idea that you need a bias for action. Right?
Yeah.
Like standing still and waiting for the perfect information and perfect everything to show up. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in a time frame that you like. So try to bound some of the most important decisions and say, really bad, really good, whatever it is, and then move.
I think to draw a line under this part in terms of, that jump, right? The other thing about risk taking on a finance level in businesses today, okay, we are on shifting sands. AI is changing everything right now. If we're stationary, we're not stationary. We're moving backwards.
Right.
Because the sands are shifting away from the market, and the market and those that are adopting, like cloud computing, when it came in and it disrupted. Risks need to be taken today. You have to, because if you're going to be risk-free in terms of your businesses, you're going backwards, because you're going backwards with the sands. Finance has to be at the center of that. Only they are the ones that are measured in terms of taking risks.
Yeah.
So I think that's really interesting. Future of finance. We covered the AI on Robotics Plus One. Where do you see it going in finance?
Well, so let's say 40 years ago, finance was the master of the company because they had all the data. And then there was sort of the democratization a little bit of data. So finance sort of lost some of their edge. Yeah. With AI, I think what's going to happen is all data will be available to pretty much everyone all the time. And, think about it. Like my little lemonade stand that we have today, how many different systems do I use at the company that are important? Well, I have an HR information system. I have a CRM. I have an accounting system. I have a system for keeping track of code. I have a system that we use for, inventorying all of the parts. Systematically important systems, I have 10 or 12. And they all have data stored differently in different ways. And not everybody has access to all that, right? Some of it's off limits to some people all the time because, it's HR or whatever.
Yeah. So
I think one of the AI revolutions is going to be, how do you take that minimum quanta of data, whatever it is, contextualize it, and now throw it into the data lake or data pool or however you want to think about it, and put it in a place where somebody can now actually analyze it and make use of it. Because part of the challenge in any corporation today is, even though there's a lot of data, it's still disparate across multiple systems. AI is going to change that. I'm convinced that AI will help contextualize and put everything at the same level. That'll be great because it'll solve a lot of problems today that are access related. it will create, though, a whole bunch of new jobs around writing AI bots to look at all of this information and figure out what does all of this mean. Just think about it today, like, future of AI. Think about auditing, right? Auditing. Auditors show up, they ask for some samples, they look at everything, they you do a data dump, they sort through it, they pick some transactions, ask you to explain, maybe you write a technical memo, boom, the audit's done. Well, in the future, AI is going to scan that whole database and pull out, here are all the high-risk transactions, right?
Yeah.
Here are all the ones you should be concerned about. It's not going to be a person, it's going to be AI. So audit teams are going to get smaller, but they're also going to get more expert because they're going to be able to find all of the skeletons.
I wrote an article around practical applications of AI and how AI lacks context. So it can report back and tell you that you've lost your largest customer, but it won't be able to tell you why. I'm currently writing my rebuttal to myself on that article because
so there
in the
you
last
go.
8 weeks it's proven to be like completely wrong. And that was picked up by Yahoo Finance and a whole load of other publications, you know what I mean? Because it was a contrarian kind of position.
Right.
I feel idiotic, Peter, because, but I entirely agree. Fix the data.
Right.
AI will do the rest. Okay, you got permissions-based access and everything you're talking about. You don't want the junior sales guy knowing what the CFO is being paid. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's certain data protection stuff that we're going to need to manage and solve for. But these aren't huge lifts.
No.
I think that I love the way you talk about the democratization of data across companies. It's very true. And that has been expedited enormously with the advent of AI.
Right.
So I look forward to seeing where it goes.
So let's take that example you have about losing a customer. I mean, CRM, accounting system, I'm looking at variances in revenue month over month, year over year, whatever the variance is. And now, can I peek into the CRM and see, oh, hey, there's a note there that says, yeah, these guys had a bad experience, last February and told us they were going to migrate and leave. And sure enough, here it is.
Yeah.
Right now, hey, cause and effect, all in the same thing. And then now I can look in the operations system. Well, what was that thing that made them mad, and pull that together. Again, the contextualized data, I think, will make that easier. There used to be a lot of jobs that were kind of aggregating and analyzing data. A lot of those jobs are going to be replaced by AI. That's just how it is. AI agents will be skimming the data and they'll be reporting the exceptions, or they'll be formatting things beautifully and telling you, here's the thing that happened. I think all of that's okay because, again, the dashboarding revolution that we've gone through, the natural end of that is everybody has 50 dashboards that they look at every day, and yet they feel like, I don't know the important things about the business, right? Suddenly you gave me 8 different dashboards, but what's each of them has 8 data elements. So now you're making me look at 64 data elements, but what's important? And that's where
experience.
It is. But can we make an AI agent that has the experience of a 30-year veteran in operations and knows, hey, these are the things you should be concerned about that happened, earlier this morning?
I think that's the plus one.
Yeah.
I can see teams getting smaller. There's no doubt about it. I'm over, like we saw Jack Dorsey taking out half his workforce in his new startup. I'm beginning to see org charts with agents on org charts, not so you got synthetic agents and biologicals. That's emerging within tech fields.
Right.
I mean, like if you want to, like the 4 largest AI businesses have a cumulative market capitalization of value above every SaaS company in the world. Including Salesforce.
Yeah, it's nuts.
So it's nuts the direction to which it's going. But the one thing I will say, we won't have to wait long, Peter. We'll know soon. Because the rate of evolution and the velocity with which stuff is moving is mind blowing.
Yeah.
So look, before we finish up, any particular mentors, any particular books at different times of your life, any particular issues you faced that you felt you overcame that molded you into the guy you are now and into this successful finance leader?
I mentioned Jim McGuire. Jim was, I was the fix-it man for the fix-it man. That ended up being important for me.
It's a great role at that age.
And he he had a different view of things, and that kind of rubbed off on me. I really liked that. When I was at KCI, I had a mentor, Teresa Johnson. She was an accountant and an auditor, and she eventually became the CFO for the business.
Yeah.
I still remember arguing with her. Now, I remember I was trained in the sciences, and there's this concept of significant figures, where we should not impute to the data more precision and accuracy than it actually has. And I remember once I had rounded some numbers, and she said, well, but is that the actual number? And I said, well, we can't say because, significant figures. And, of course, to an auditor, the significant figure is eight.
That's
eight. Yeah. It's 8 places past the decimal point. That's where it gets significant. So I remember having this late night argument with her in her office about, that this was a range of outcomes. And she said, no, it's one outcome. And, we were it's like the accounting view versus the finance view. Anyway, interactions like that help me sharpen how I think about things, help me explain it to people. I do think there's this underlying almost helping people grasp the concepts of finance and understand them in a way that they can, use it to operate their business. That's actually part of what the finance team should be doing too. And I think, I have people who work for me today who are great at that and help the operational team see, hey, here's maybe a heuristic or a formula you could use to kind of think about how we're going to evaluate it in the end, and you can get a shortcut answer without asking me. When I really, really liked my interactions with Carl. Carl was, Carl Pickler, CFO at Rackspace. He had come out of the academic side. He was a great guy on the theory. Like if I ever wanted to have a cost of capital discussion with somebody, just go grab Carl and we could get in the submarine and go as deep as we wanted.
So Sneaker, Carl's podcast drops on Tuesday next.
Yeah, you got to listen to it. Yeah. He's a great guy. Books. Listen, I don't read a lot of business books. Some are good, some maybe not so much. But there's a little book out there by George Leonard called Mastery.
Okay.
It's only about 150, 160 pages. He's actually a martial arts, professional. And he wrote this book about becoming a master in the martial arts. And his key insight is we spend a lot of time, like everybody thinks that it's this steady upward climb to mastery. And he said, no, that's not right at all. You spend all this time on a plateau, and then you hit this inflection point where you grow, and then you spend time on the next plateau, and then you grow. But there's no steady climb. And so you must love being on the plateau. And the plateau often feels frustrating, but it's necessary to get to the growth. I think that's insightful for a lot of people because every day I'm not doing exciting projects. Every day I'm not like, oh, I learned a new Excel formula, right?
Yeah.
But I am doing my job and I like it and I get energy from it. And I think, those things accumulate over time into the inflection points that he's talking about. I have found in my own life, this is just me, I have found World War II to be an incredibly fascinating thing to study. And it has so many applications to business today. So many applications. There's so many problems that were solved in World War II that we're still are alive and well in every business today. So, it's something that I think you can look back and find a historical analog that is almost always useful. Here's another one. You could think about, D-Day's coming up, the Allies invaded France. Well, the Americans ended up on the westernmost beaches and the British Canadians on the easternmost beaches. Well, why did that happen?
Okay.
Well, it just turns out when they brought the Yanks to England, the fastest way to sail them was land them on the eastern part of England. And then rather than spend all the resources to try and transport them somewhere else, where did they stay? Eastern part of England.
Yeah.
And they stayed there. And that ended up being important because when the breakout happens in Normandy, in Operation Cobra in August of 1944, the American Army leads that. Okay. and they let it because of the position that they were in. All right. And you go back and you say, well, who made this decision to put the American army on the east coast of England and the eastern half of England, or the western half, excuse me? Who made that decision? And the answer is probably some very low-level functionary. Yeah,
exactly.
who, when the first Yank showed up, said, we actually don't have train capacity to send them anywhere else. Where can we put them close by? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's just one of those decisions that snowballed into something much, much bigger. Anyway, other books. I think The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yeah.
That's a classic. I mean, I try to read it every 5 years or so, and I always learn something out of that.
Yeah.
There's a new book out by trying to think of the author's name, but it's Atomic Habits, James something. It's a fantastic book. Again, it's really kind of around personal productivity, but at the end of it, like Bill Gates made this comment one time, and it really resonated with me. He said, my most productive software developers are 1,000 times more productive than the average software developer. And I think it's like that in finance. Like the most productive finance person, that person you seek out and look for on every project. Can I have that person? They're just so far ahead of the next person that it's visible. So try to be that person and figure out, what are the habits, what are the systems in my life that I need in place to play to my strengths.
Super advice.
James Clear.
Yeah.
James Clear is his name. Atomic Habits.
So look, wrapping up, one kind of decision that you made that you would advise other people within that. I said one decision that you made looking back that you would advise them to do. And we could have covered it already. It doesn't need to be new. Be curious.
That I should have done differently. Be curious. Be curious.
Be curious.
Be curious. In your life, be curious. It's okay to be curious. And listen, for me, it manifests in crazy ways. Like if something breaks in the house, I almost always think, I can probably fix that. Because I can look on YouTube, whatever, unscrew the thing. Yeah, ChatGPT. Like, I think I can do that. Now, that's dangerous because, now I've got a bunch of disassembled stuff all over the house. But I think being curious, in my opinion, very important. In fact, when I hire analysts, I almost always look for that curiosity. If they're not curious in business, what area of their life are they curious in? How does it manifest itself? Yeah. And if it's not there, they're not going to be a great analyst, in my opinion. Like I ran into a guy one time, he loved movies and he could go deep on movies. Okay. He knew the box office on every movie and he could split it international versus like he was an expert on that. And I was like, you know what? This guy just hasn't been as excited about the business as he is about this other thing. But man, he's super curious about this other thing. If we can just
overlay that, yes.
If we just overlay it, he's going to be the most successful analyst we've ever hired.
Did it work out?
I left when that one was still an experiment.
And what wouldn't you have done? What advice would you give not to do?
Yeah. Wow. How long do we have? I think, in finance, we are viewed as the referees of the business. Like it or not, we call the balls and the strikes on the business. Call the balls and the strikes. It's okay. And it's also okay to say, I don't know. I wish in some cases I'd said, I don't know more often. Or it's also okay to give a range. Don't give a number, give a range.
Yeah.
Do that. And good things will happen. And I could just think back to several occasions where I would have been safe with a range, but I gave a number and I got in trouble on it.
Well, hey, as a CEO, directionally accurate in the moment is exponentially better than being 100% accurate 2 weeks later when the decision has been made.
Yeah.
So, I mean, 100%. Look, this has been great. Thank you so much, Peter. From microbiology to massive like AT&T and SPC kind of businesses across back into a sort of science world. Rackspace at a time of disruption post the Apollo come in, back with Rackspace founders across into robotics. Like it's really interesting. Thanks so much for your time. I hope the viewers and listeners have taken something out of it. I think they will. And look, it's been great having you on. Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been the CFO Review.